Today we're going to talk about growth hacking and how to growth hack your business. And you probably heard of this term. You may have been involved in some activities related to this. But in general, the minute I mention growth hacking, and I remember when I mentioned it first time to my wife, she's like, "Oh, you're doing bad stuff. You're involved with some really bad people. You're creating trouble in the world." And it's a huge misconception because it's an emerging practice, and it's part of what I call the super skills of the future. It's something that you'll need to learn one way or the other, whether in part or in whole. So let's get started. The introduction, given, thank you very much, covers a lot of who I am. So one of the things is that I'm the best-selling author of a book called Ready, Set, Growth Hack. And this was done after many years in creating a blueprint that would help an organization, whether you're a small one-man organization or a Fortune 1000, create a blueprint on how to grow. And the essence behind this is that for every organization I've ever worked with, there's no bulletproof single formula. Anybody who tries to sell you a single formula, they're most likely selling you hot air. Your formula for success as an individual or an individual company is very different to that of everybody else. It never can be just a copy-paste. And so this is a process that I've been working with and I published as a book. Not the one that we're talking about today. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And that's why I'm there. One of the things that I will highlight is a lot of the people ask me about my work with NASA. And I've been working with their technology transfer program for a number of years in the transfer of what's called spin-in and spin-off technology. And I built a whole company around it, which I sold at the end of 2017. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to get into the more exciting stuff because I get super charged up about teaching you and getting you excited about how to grow what you're trying to grow. So let's get cracking. This is the first book, so I just whip that up there so you can take a look. If you ever have a chance and would like to get one, you can go to Amazon. This is the second book, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. And this book came into existence for special reasons of things that don't exist, a gap that people had in the space that needed to be solved. And we're going to go a bit deeper into that today. So we're going to talk about what is growth hacking, because that's probably the first thing on your mind right now, how it works, and why it's really important. So let's get started. So the first question, and I've been asked this many times already today, because it's always the first question, is that, can I use it? Isn't it just exclusive to startup companies, or isn't it just exclusive to tech companies? The answer is no, actually. It is not sector-specific. It is not profession-specific. It is an emerging strategic practice that helps you work across many industries. So I'm going to show you 3 clients that we work with across the board, completely on different ends of the spectrum. On the left side here, we have a company in Australia we work with. It's a supplement company. They were ranking very poorly. We were 6th place in that specific segment. In 6 months, we actually managed to get them that spot. And by end of the year, we got them into the 2nd spot in that industry with a 40x growth. On a complete other side, a fast food chain in Canada that had 50 branches across two cities is growing. We got them 18x. And then we got a fashion SaaS company, software as a service company, 65 times their growth. So the first thing you're thinking is like, is that even possible? How did they do this? Is this like a news bulletin that you hear on CNN about some amazing entrepreneur or group of entrepreneurs who built this amazing company and got these results? So in some ways, these kind of results are rare, but they're not impossible to gain. And that brings us to the next part is, how do they get these type of results? How do you perform to grow while others don't? The starting point is usually how you think, what you understand, how you look at growth. So I'm going to show you some realities of what growth actually really looks like to understand how rare these skills are. There are about 32 million companies registered in the US. 1% of them make $1 million more a year. And out of that 1% that make $1 million more in a year, they make over $1 billion a year. So you can see that you can start counting companies on your hand. What's even more interesting is 4.5% of the 1% are unicorns. Unicorns are startup companies that are valued at $1 billion or more. There are roughly about 500 that are identifiable or registered, not registered, but identifiable globally at the moment. Half of them are in the US, quarter of them in China, and the remaining are spread across the world for obvious reasons, which I don't need to explain. So as you can see, that growth isn't exactly accessible to everybody doing it the exact same way, but not an impossibility, and that's what I'm going to show you. Here's what's interesting. once I explain, how far growth can go, people ask me, well, who is it that uses growth hacking? I mean, is it really that widely used? Is that widely understood? So if you remember, I just mentioned unicorns, right? Remember, so 1% of 1%, 4.5% of that 1%, 98% of them are involved in growth hacking. These are unicorns, famous names like Airbnb or Dropbox. I mean, you see these kinds of names all the time. The list just keeps going on and on and on. And usually they grow the way they grow because they're growth hacking. They are not doing things the same way that a startup does, a normal startup, a corporate, or a Fortune 1000. But what is interesting is unicorns have presented an example for the remaining of the corporate world to try to understand how they can use growth hacking. So only 21% of startups, as you can see, 3.5% of corporates. But what's most interesting are the Fortune 1000s. 1.5% of them, not very many are using them. And the reason is that growth hacking, in order for it to work, is largely counterintuitive to the way that they had been growing before, because it has a structural change. The difference in structure between an organization at the bottom at 98% versus one at 1.5% is that growth will supersede every other business function. That might sound logical, but that isn't how most organizations work. Most organizations work where they'll say, okay, your function is operations, your function is tech, your function is marketing, and then I want you to grow. You're responsible to grow. That's a traditional way of how a structure would work. A unicorn that uses growth hacking and puts it at the center, they put growth on top, and every function is subservient to growth. If it doesn't function, they get rid of it. If it doesn't work, they fix it. If it's working okay, they optimize it. If it's optimized, they take it to the next level. And we take it to the next level and it doesn't work anymore, they found the next growth hack. That's the difference. So what is growth hacking? What's the definition? So if you Google it, okay, you're going to get like a very generic definition. It talks about the use of technology, which can kind of throw you off. So in my book, I presented a much wider, much more holistic presentation on what I actually see when it comes to growth hacking. Growth hacking is essentially as simple as I have 4 units of effort with the output of 1 unit of result. That means I do all these things, I do these things, but I only get 1 unit of result out of it, okay? Growth hacking is the little ninja in the middle there. That's you, the growth hacker, who transforms a process from 4 units of effort to 1 result, the complete opposite. I make 1 unit of effort, and I get 4 units of results. We call this disproportionate growth, where the resources used to grow get way more exponential output on the other side. That's growth hacking. You remove all those technical terms because they will confuse you. Not also will they confuse you, they will throw you off what the goal of what growth hacking is actually really about. So I always like to create more to the definition so that you understand where this comes from and how it's evolved, because there's a lot of misconceptions around the practice. The initial part where growth hacking starts, so growth hacking starts in a very dark place. Places like the dark web, we call them, the shadow activities. When it was purely 100% code, right, before it evolved as a practice, it was used as a very shady practice. It still is in many ways today, which isn't something that I advocate, but I will talk about because it's important to understand. And then it shifted to what was in roughly 2009, 2011, it started to get coined as code plus marketing. So it was seen as like there was only one business function that's going to work with tech. And I'm going to explain to you the whole part of tech in a second. Today, and moving forward to the future, we look at this as what's called cross-functional growth hacking. And that's essentially you're bringing in tech, you're bringing in marketing, and plus a function. So marketing can be another function. So it could be like code plus HR plus operations, code plus marketing plus strategy, code plus strategy plus operations, right? When you start to look at a holistic manner in how you would develop a growth hack, you start to get exponential growth. You'll see a scale here at the very bottom from black hat to white hat tactics. You've probably heard these terms before. And where the real results are, unfortunately, is in the black hat side, okay? And so I run a program with a global community which we call the grayscale activities. Grayscale activities are people who were in the black hat area and now have shifted to somewhere in the gray area, usually in the darker side of the grayscale, but don't break the law. You know, they don't break the law, they don't enter unethical practices, but they're not white hat tactics or strategies. And the reason that this is important, if you were to open Google right now and you type in the word growth hack and you put whatever it is you want to growth hack. I want to growth hack my CRM. I want to growth hack LinkedIn. I want to growth hack whatever it is that you're going to find is a white hat trick. Usually, those strategies, 99% of the time don't work. Okay? What really works is in the grayscale. And the reason being is, and we discovered this using some AI data that we use in a program that we call Growth Labs, okay? And what we discovered is basically 4 classifications as you move across the bottom here. We've got growth hacks that are top secret, ones that are secret, and those that are declassified, and then those that are in the open. Those are the open are your white hat tactics. You can find them anywhere. But the top secret and the secret ones stay in close circles because if they're exposed, they're like milk, they'll expire, right? The more people who use a certain type of growth hack, the quicker that growth hack starts to not work. And so the top growth hackers in the world will never tell you, or rarely will tell you, exactly how they did it. It's almost like there's a funny parallel. It's a documentary I saw many years ago about the magician business, magicians, you know, who make all these magic tricks. And so you have a guy that can make an apple disappear, a guy that can make a bird disappear. Next guy comes and makes the audience disappear. Another guy makes a building disappear. The tactic or the strategy is the same, but they're amplifying the object that they're making disappear. But the day that one of them exposes the secret out of the industry, it could be life-threatening. And there's been documentaries about it in the magician business, which is really, really interesting parallel because we've seen, not things to the extent of it could be life-threatening, but an extent where some serious things can happen if you expose secrets in the industry, and there's very specific reasons for that. So now we're going to talk about how, right? So we're talking about what it is, and I hope that it sinks in a little bit more. And I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time at the end here, hopefully to ask any questions that you have, because there are probably still things floating around. So, how does this work? Okay, so through the data that we use at Growth Labs, okay, we discovered that there's basically 4 areas that you would growth hack. So if you were sitting right now and you're saying, I want to growth hack my business, I want to, whatever it is you want to growth hack, you're thinking, where do I start? Okay, this quadrant is where you start. What you're looking for is an exploitation. And when you're exploiting, you're looking at, I'm finding a limit, I'm trying to find a gap, I'm trying to find a hole, or I'm trying to find a combination, okay? Now, what is interesting for all of you that are using Zoho, you're actually been growth hacking subconsciously without actually knowing it, and that's the bottom quadrant, the combination. And what I mean by that is the integration of an automation of tools, okay? So in the growth hacking world, I mean, it's funny because we were having this conversation before this presentation, and we work with like a ton of tools. That's just our business. We work with a ton of tools. It costs us a fortune because we're consistently looking for one of these 4 exploitation areas to create a growth hack. And so what's interesting is like whenever we find a system where we're able to integrate and automate very quickly and very easily and at low cost, you've already started growth hacking even if you don't know it yet. And that's just entry level. Next is the actual growth hacking process. Now, obviously I don't have enough time to go into all of this today, so I'm going to give you just a brief overview. So what we look at is the growth hacking cycle. We start at the top, the growth problem, the growth experimentation, which is the hacking itself, and then scaling, which we call growth extension. Now, what's interesting about the growth problem is that 85% of the time when I sit with a CEO of a company and I ask him one very simple question, he or she, I say, tell me your top 3 priorities right now. 85% of them cannot answer the question. Nothing to do with intelligence, nothing to do with anything that you may think. They're distracted. They have too many things in the way that their priorities are not clear. And when priorities are not clear, you cannot answer the question, which is, what's my growth problem? You know, what is it that's going to change the way that your business is going to work that you cannot fix? Every organization in the world has a growth barrier, a growth problem. And if you cannot clearly define it because of lack of clarity, you will not be able to do the remaining of the cycle. That's the starting point of doing all this. And in the middle is the growth hacking itself. I'm going to go a bit more into the process. But in the last part, which is part of what Zoho actually solves, as we mentioned, is a combination, is what we call the scaling part. Now, I define scaling a little bit differently than maybe some of the things you've been used to in the past. The starting point is automation, okay? Without automation, you cannot scale. And then scaling is obviously doing more, and then full-scale operations. Most growth hacks actually fail, not in automation, but in scale. And then they fail in full-scale operations. But what's the difference? Okay, so let's keep it really simple. Scale is like doing more of the same, but being able not to lose what we call distortion. So if I was to do it once or 1 million times, there cannot be a distortion in quality or value or implementation. That's scale. But what happens is when I go into full-scale operations, so we've all, I think, used some form of a tech, like Google. Google has some of these problems. So you go use an absolutely brand new service they're delivering, and you go in there and it starts asking you questions that they already know, right? You've all been there where it's like, give us your username and password, but I'm already logged in, you already know me, or we need to know your age, or we need some profile stuff, but you know that this company already has it, right? That means it's not in full-scale operations. Full-scale operations is when it becomes scalable and it becomes part of your whole operational process. And the reason being is that it needs to be sustainable, okay? Real growth is not a spike. You know, we see this spike, we're all looking for this, spike of growth, okay? And the spike of growth is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to you. What we're looking for is a rising horizon, okay? So we're looking for something that's smooth, that rises slowly, but is able to pick up momentum. The momentum, which is built through scale and full-scale operations, is the secret behind long-term sustainable growth. This is where you start to experience the exponential portion of growth. I'm going to give you just a really super quick question, not question, but a story. This happens almost in every startup I build. Someone in sales or marketing comes in and said, hey, we have some amazing results, and I look at it on the chart and it's a spike, and they see that I'm not very happy. They're like, what the hell, we've done all this work, why aren't you happy? And I say, because the problem with a spike is like doing drugs. Once you have the first experience, you want to keep having the same experience, and you're going to run out of energy trying to do the same thing over and over again. What we're looking for is a rising horizon where the momentum keeps us moving, not us keep chasing the spike. It's the other way around. That's how you build exponential growth. So we're going to focus on this one part, okay? And this is what I've developed in the book that you potentially can win, okay? So what happened is there's a 5-step process. I'm going to go a little bit more detail into that. But what happened is that in the world of business methodologies, right? So I'm going to go next slide here. It's probably better to show you this. So for those of you who've ever done an MBA or the likes of, okay, you're going to feel bad when I'm done with this. You're going to be like, I've wasted my money going to business school. And those of you who haven't been to business school are going to be thankful that I've just saved you a whole bunch of money not going to a business school to waste your time on what I'm about to teach you. This is extremely powerful. There are 4 different types of methodologies, and most people think that they all bleed together because the people who produce them want you to believe that. The first type are offering design methodology. So that's things like that help you develop a product or a service. So 2 excellent examples is design thinking or sprint design, designed by Google. So you've probably heard of some of these, maybe you've used some of these, but not to be confused that it fits here as a design methodology. In the middle, we've got product management methodologies, Agile, Scrum. I don't know if you use any of these, but that's where they fit. And then we got company building methodologies. That's your business model canvas, your lean startup canvas, and so forth. They're designed to help you build a company, to start, not to grow. And then we've got an area which are accelerated growth methodologies. Here's the funny thing about this space. Don't you think that would be probably the most important part after all of these methodologies? Because these methodologies actually work in complement with one another. They actually don't compete with each other as they make it believe, make you believe that. Because you build a product, you design the product, and then you manage it so you can deliver it. You build a company around it so you can make money and grow, and then you need to grow. But there's a gap. There's a gap. Right? If I was to ask any of you at this moment, can you name me one methodology that would help you accelerate your growth? Does anybody have an idea of what that might be? Okay. Because there isn't, actually. There are some of them, but they deal with some very small parts of growth. In fact, you probably haven't even heard of some of them if I was to list them to you. Growth thinking is like the design thinking for growth. It works with a methodology that's designed to activate you so that you can start developing your own growth hacks. Very soon I'll be running a challenge. I've got a few candidates who we'll be doing this with, and I suggest you follow us. We're going to do 10 growth hacks in 3 days, and we're going to document it, the experience, like a reality show. How does an entrepreneur take his or her growth, use this methodology, and expedite the process so that they can actually visualize it, they can actually implement it. Because the objective is to go from idea to action as quickly, as low cost, and as easily as possible. So now we're going to go into the why, okay? So I'm going to keep this part super simple. Read these statements. If you say yes to any of them, you've already recognized why they're important. I enter businesses all the time who the first thing they do is complain to me that we see new people entering our industry that don't know what they're doing. We see people in our industry being acquired, but we don't know why. Even more dangerously, they see adjacent industries entering their industry and changing the business models of the whole industry itself. It's like Uber, designing Uber Eat that goes into the food business, and they're a transport company originally. An adjacent adjustment. It freaks people out. It's abnormal. They don't know how to respond to it. Margins going down. Customers squeezing you for things that they want more value. They're not getting enough. Competitors changing the landscape quicker than you. They just happen to know something you don't. They happen to work faster than you. They happen to be more well-funded than you. Or so it seems. You never know. So any of these reasons, okay, are reasons why you need to be looking at growth hacking. And I'm going to talk about number 9 very carefully, because number 9 is probably the very first place most people will start. They'll say, we want to become lean, and I want to start cutting some costs, okay? This is called bottom line measures. Bottom line measures we've all witnessed. Restructuring, efficiency, effectiveness, cost cutting. These are important things, but they do not lead to exponential growth. That is the dilemma. This is a huge problem in the leadership of many organizations. True growth is in the 1% of effort of an organization in top-line growth. Top-line growth is moving the gross revenue beyond the boundaries of where it's in. And bottom line deals with whatever it is that you bring in from gross revenue. You see what I mean? Every time I grow the boundaries of my business, I'm having exponential growth possibilities. But every time I'm doing cost cutting, and I'm not saying it's not important, because you do need to do it. It's part of the process. But you're not going to grow exponentially. You're going to grow incrementally. A 5%, 10%, a 3% margin in move might be good for some businesses. But why are their competitors exponentially growing? Why are startups that are entering, that know nothing in your perception of your industry, getting much larger growth numbers than you? There must be something behind it, right? So that's the importance of why. Next is how to get started, right? What do you do about this thing? So first is understanding what growth hacking is. Now, I provide several resources, several free resources, might I add, and low-cost resources, because I believe it's important as one of the key super skills of the future. You need to know what this is. You need to know how it works. Next, you need to start experimenting. If you notice, at the center of the process that I showed to you is experimentation. Why? Experimentation addresses a very important ego problem, actually, when it comes to growth. If any of you, I call it the boardroom ego. So if you're sitting with your team or the board of an organization and you sit there and you're trying to solve a problem, everyone seems to know the answer, right? If everybody knows the answer at the table, why the hell are you not growing? You're not growing because you're not experimenting. True growth comes from the unknown, areas that you have not thought that will actually work. Because if you knew it was going to work, you would actually be growing. You wouldn't have the conversation. The narrative wouldn't even exist. But the reason that the narrative is there is because you're not growing. That's the truth, right? But you need to experiment. So experimentation is almost like an art and a science combined. That's how growth thinking works. How do you move quickly? How do you go low cost? And how do you make it super easy so that you can fail as fast as possible? Because you will fail. That's part of how this process works. If you're not failing, something is wrong. You need to fail quick, because you're getting 1 inch closer every time to what is actually going to work and make you grow. Finally, is getting the right people working with you. Now, our estimates as a community, we think that there's roughly about 5,000 growth hackers globally, okay? You're thinking, wow, 5,000 people, that doesn't sound like very many. I met a growth hacker the other day, or I saw a guy in LinkedIn who says he's a growth hacker. A lot of people use the term or the title to elevate what they do. They're not necessarily growth hackers. It's a very small community. 1,200, about 1,100 to 1,200 of them exist in 4 communities that I work with. And we work with these guys in a very interesting way because one of the biggest things about this space that we've noticed is education. And what I mean by education is not me teaching what growth hacking is, but the experimentation results. What did we learn? And so we exponentially move down the learning curve every single time we have someone in our community who's sharing how they actually pulled something off. And they shouldn't be afraid to do it because you need to up your game every time. The growth hack has an expiry date on it. It'll only work for a certain period of time. You need to optimize it and move on to the next because there's a bigger one around the corner.
Thank you so much.